Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan McNeil. This is the Builder by Day podcast. And today we're going to do a bit of a year-end recap. This is our final episode that we will record probably before the end of the year. And I'd like to take the opportunity to recap the last couple of months. It feels like it's been more than that. But our first episode was recorded and produced back in mid-October. Since then, there has been 13 episodes, and that doesn't count some of the smaller, shorter clips that we've done. But as far as guests, where it has been the long form podcast, we've produced 13. It's been a busy couple of months, and I want to take an opportunity to run through some of that, discuss a little bit about the new year and what we have planned, and also just run through some of the statistics I think that I find a little bit interesting that you guys, I've had people ask. So part of the reason I'm doing this is I've had some friends and associates and people that have been on the show who have asked some of these questions that are interesting to look into. And I think, for their purposes and everybody else, we'll share some of that information. So first, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate that. And also thanks for tuning in to anyone that has watched any of our podcasts from the beginning. I do appreciate your time. I appreciate you tuning in. This has been a bit of a new, somewhat of a business venture, I guess, for me. It's a bit of a unique situation or scenario when somebody starts a podcast. You could make the argument, of course, that it's very similar to starting a new business, except that it also has some parallels with, the entertainment industry, of course, where you're putting yourself on stage, for lack of a better term. So if you start your own business and that things don't go well and that business doesn't survive a year or two or three, then that's unfortunate. But when your business is something like this, say a podcast, there's no safety net. So from day one, the first episode that you produce and every episode and everything that you do thereafter is in the public eye immediately. So if it doesn't go well, if it's not well received, it's going to be, you're going to get immediate real-time feedback as to how that's going. In saying that, so far things have gone very well. We're very happy with everything and where it is after the first couple of months and ending year 2024. We're looking forward to 2025 and continuing on with what we've started. I'd like to this is a question that some folks have asked several times, and so I'd like to somewhat paint the picture very literally of how this thing works in our world. So for those that don't already know, the name of the podcast, Builder by Day, was chosen by me for the reason that is my day job. By day, I am a home builder, and I had an interest in starting a podcast and having conversations with interesting people, having interesting conversations with people I've never met before. It's a way for me to, expand my knowledge base and at the same time, hopefully, share some information with the listeners that they may also find interesting. We started the podcast back in mid-October, I believe was the first episode. And on the first episode, I'm going to run through each episode just briefly to give everybody a bit of a snapshot, because I suspect that not everybody has listened to every episode. We do have a few loyal fans already who have listened to every episode, and they make sure that I'm aware of that, and I do appreciate that. So again, first and foremost, thanks to everybody so far for who have listened to date. And I'll mention this a couple of times, at least now and at the end. If you haven't already, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. I promise you that we're not tracking your information. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to bombard you with emails. It's just as simply as click subscribe. It does help with the exposure of the podcast. And same thing with, the like button. And in an ideal world, we do appreciate and look forward to hearing comments. For anyone that doesn't know, each person, from what I gather from the folks I talk to, everyone has their sort of go-to ways of listening to or watching podcasts. For those that don't know, of course, we're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and probably many more that I haven't mentioned here, but it is both in audio and video form. You can find us in both formats, whatever you prefer. I assume, because I'm somebody who I watch and listen to podcasts. So there are certain podcasts myself personally that I listen to as I'm driving in the truck. And there are other podcasts that I watch, or I might, a certain episode, depending on who the guest is, for instance, I might make a point to watch that episode. I assume that most people are the same way, but I also suspect there are folks who only ever watch podcasts in, say, video form, and then there are those who certainly only ever listen to them. So we will continue to produce, of course, across all platforms and hopefully reach as many people as possible. I'll go back to what I said earlier. One of the things I wanted to sort of paint a picture for, because I'm nothing if not transparent and trying to approach this from a bit of a different perspective in sort of letting everybody in on how this goes. So for those who don't know, some have, because of course anybody who knows me and has been here knows this, but when we started the podcast, this was a new venture that we started in September as far as putting together the things that we needed, and for me, finding the person I needed to help me do this, which is Brendan, behind the camera. And there was a period of time for probably 4 or 6 weeks, somewhere in that range, I guess, where we were just simply getting prepared. We were buying equipment and getting websites prepared and getting social media accounts set up, and all of that takes a lot of time. And then, of course, the other thing that we had to do was, didn't have to do, but I wanted to do, was I built a studio here in our office location. So the location here where I'm sitting, this is what we refer to as the studio, and it is physically located in our office building at the Stonewater Homes office building in Fall River. It was essentially a storage room in the back of the building that we repurposed for much better use now. And this is where we shoot all the conversations and all the podcast episodes that we have. The first 3 episodes, this set wasn't yet ready. So we filmed those episodes on site at one of the 2E2 lottery homes that we had built. And that was mainly done for 2 reasons. The first reason I did that was, of course, that we didn't have our set ready and we needed somewhere to shoot. And we wanted it to be something reflective of Stonewater Homes and the work that we do. I didn't want to just shoot that, in a location that didn't really have much meaning. And of course, and the other reason why we had a bit of a hurry up offense to get the first few episodes released is we were approaching a municipal election here in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And I really wanted to get a few, or a couple at least, of the candidates who were running for mayor to join me on the podcast and have a conversation, which we did do. And they were episodes 2 and 3. And then after episode 3, I think we might have shot one more episode elsewhere, and then we were in the studio. So here we are now in the studio. I wanted to sort of run through a few stats for anyone that's interested. Now these, keep in mind that statistics when it comes to viewership and anything related to podcasts in general, or any type of social media viewership, we're all used to watching, the big names when it comes to these things that we watch in podcasts that we listen to. And you're dealing with, you'll see things even on, we all do it. You'll see something on YouTube or Instagram or whatever it might be. And you look at something and it has tens or hundreds of thousands of views or millions of views. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot of viewership for some clips. And of course, a lot of that happens because partly the content, but in many cases, there's already a following there. And certainly if you're a celebrity or an influencer of some kind before you get started, then you already have a base of followers. That was not me. So as anyone who knows me knows, I was not in any way involved in social media. I had no social media presence before we started this. I still don't personally have a social media presence. I'm not someone to communicate that way. Certainly the Builder by Day podcast has a social media presence. And of course, that's, for the time being, that's mostly yours truly and the guests that I have conversations with. But we're working on it. So things have gone well. When you start these things, you don't know where it's going to go. But by comparison purposes, when we look at where we are now after 2 months, we're pretty happy with how things are going. We're moving in the right direction. We're constantly gaining viewers and viewership and viewing hours, which is all good. We've started doing a few things in the last few weeks to enhance some of that viewership with shorter videos and shorter clips. And not all of you would necessarily see that. So if you're just watching or listening, say on Spotify or iTunes or wherever the case may be, then you may not even capture some of these smaller clips, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But I just want to share quickly, these are pretty humble statistics for the time being. But the purpose of this episode was I wanted to have a conversation and share some year-end statistics, I guess we could call them. That's what they are. But I'd like to then, hopefully we'll do this again next year and we can do a bit of a comparison and see where we were and where we are then. As of today, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 53,000 views on YouTube. This is collectively across all of our productions and episodes. We have 156 subscribers today. And after this episode, I'm hoping that anybody's listening will click the button and increase that. But remember, 2 months ago, we had none. So I'm happy with how that's going. We're increasing at a faster rate as time goes by, which is good. We had our top performing short, which was Brendan had made a short clip from a longer episode, and we produced that and shared that on YouTube. And that particular clip has somewhere in the neighborhood of 26,000 views, which is very good for us. It's excellent. And and still climbing, almost 1,000 views just in the last 48 hours for something that we produced a few weeks ago now. We also started producing short clips that we can share on TikTok. And these clips get a lot of viewership. They collectively, these little clips, even though they might only be 1 minute in length or a minute and a half in length, because they get so much more attention, they're somewhat of a promotional video, I guess you could call it. It is a clip of a longer podcast or a segment of a podcast, but it does a great job of grabbing the attention of somebody who may not otherwise be familiar with us. And then of course they see where this is and perhaps they click a few links and end up paying attention to the longer version of the episode that clip was clipped from. Again, when we started in TikTok, we had no followers 30 days ago, and now we have 500 and some followers, which is nothing in the big scheme of things, but from zero to where we are now, we're moving in the right direction, and we're happy with how that's going. The top video for us in TikTok, a little short clip, was a bit of a rant that we put together and regarding Prime Minister Trudeau and his $50 million rental fund and some of this crackdown that's happening with respect to the property ownership and usage of properties. So that was a clip that had hundreds and hundreds of comments, which and hundreds of shares as well, which for us is really good. That's exactly what we're after. We're trying to put the message out there and share some things, and these little clips do help. So if you're currently following us on YouTube or Spotify, I would also recommend and would ask you to follow us also on TikTok. That's where you're going to see some of the shorter clips that we produce. And you may see some things there that, you perhaps didn't notice, or some segments that were of more importance during some of the longer portions of the episodes. One thing to mention, there are some folks out there, for instance, who listen to the podcast every week, and that's great. I appreciate that loyalty, especially this early on. But the reality is, not everybody listens to the entire long form podcast. That would be fantastic, but that's not reality. And that's not just for us. That's for everyone that produces long form podcasts. Not everybody that listens to the podcast from start to finish. So you're obviously aiming at that, but that's not reality. But for some folks it is. So one of the things I want to do is, knowing that, of course, most folks will not have listened to every episode we've produced, I just want to run through quickly just a couple of sentences on each episode that we've produced to familiarize the listeners as to perhaps which episodes if they haven't heard, and then they can decide if it's something that might interest them. So again, there have been 13 long-form podcast episodes that we've produced in the last couple of months. And the first episode was, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Derek Taylor, who also is, he works at Taylor Flooring. He is our flooring specialist. So Derek supplies and installs all the flooring in the homes that we build. Derek and I are also, personally, we're good friends. We play golf together. You know, we spend time together outside of the professional environment. And the reason I brought Derek on for episode 1 was partly, of course, because he is in the construction industry and it is related to my business, and it would be informative to the folks who listen to the podcast in that respect. But also because he's a friend of mine, I'm able to just have a casual conversation with him. And it was good. That first episode, of course, I had never been on a podcast. I had never sat in front of a microphone and had a conversation. So, you know, I didn't know any more about what I was doing than Derek did, but we figured it out. The second episode was with Pam Lovelace, and Pam was she was a candidate running for mayor here in Halifax in the HRM. And when I reached out to Pam, she was polite enough to join me for that episode. I had never met Pam before. I was not familiar with her, nor was she with I. And, you know, I appreciate Pam. Thanks for showing up. I appreciate that very much. I think it was a good episode. That was probably the episode in which I was the most nervous, because it was the first time I had a conversation with somebody that, you know, where I was essentially interviewing that person, and that's not something that I had any familiarity with or experience with. The second episode was Way Mason, who was also running for mayor at the time. Again, we had a good conversation about his run for mayor. We also talked a fair bit about housing, affordable housing, and different housing options. And Way had some good insight in that respect. For the record, I did reach out also to Andy Fillmore, who was also running for mayor and was ultimately elected as the mayor. I didn't hear back from Andy. I reached out a couple of times, and then I actually ran into him in the parking lot here at the Tim Hortons Fall River. Tracked him down, put down my window, introduced myself, asked him if he'd be interested in joining me, and if so, just, you know, check his inbox. I didn't hear back from him. I'm not surprised. Andy, you know, didn't have much to gain and probably everything to lose by interviewing with folks a couple of days before the election. One thing I will say about those couple of interviews and ultimately how that election played out is I saw firsthand the level of, I guess maybe we could call it support for each candidate. When Pam showed up for the interview, I think we set it for 9 o'clock in the morning one day, and it was at the lottery home that we had out in her community, actually in Hammonds Plains. And Pam just showed up by herself. She drove into the driveway and hopped out of the car and walked in the front door, and we started chatting. And Pam would have been the least experienced politician in that group that was running. Way had more experience, and when Way showed up, he had somebody with him that was there, for support, that helps him organize his time and, keeps him on time, I guess, to move to the next appointment. And again, thanks for Way for doing that. I appreciate that. Way also didn't know me from a hole in the ground and was willing to stop by and have a good conversation. When we moved on from there, the fourth episode was Kyle Seelig, and Kyle is a mortgage specialist at RBC. Again, somebody who I deal with in a professional perspective. And we had a good conversation about mortgages and some different tips for homeowners and home buyers. I think that episode is very useful for anybody who doesn't currently have a mortgage, is thinking about buying, and wants to know, where they should start. The episode number 5, I was solo on that one. So in episode 5, I spoke a bit about, from a new home construction perspective, how the process works at Stonewater Homes. And I talked a bit about some of the history of Stonewater and how I started the business. I think that's also a great episode. If you're interested in building a new home and you're interested in communicating with us about that new home, I think that's a great episode to listen to, just to get a broad strokes picture of how generally the process works. In episode 6, I met with and had a conversation with my partner on the real estate front, Susan Young. And Susan is a realtor and managing associate broker with Keller Williams. And she and I also work together on the McNeil Young real estate team. And Susan essentially handles all things real estate related in my world. So when any homes that we sell would be considered a real estate transaction. So this would be homes that are where there is real estate changing hands, meaning there is property changing hands. Susan handles the listings of our homes. She deals exclusively with any buyers, and she handles all things related to the real estate side of the transactions when we sell homes. Susan is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to real estate in general. She's been doing this for quite some time. She and I met in the real estate world probably 20 years ago now. So we've known each other for a long time. I know Susan's husband, Chris, also works with us on the team. And so again, that episode, if you're somebody who's interested in perhaps purchasing real estate here in the greater Halifax area in Nova Scotia, or you have some, just some curiosity as to how some of that works, that's a good episode to listen to. Episode number 7 was Mark DeWolf, and Mark is in the wine industry here in Nova Scotia. That was also a really good episode. I learned a number of things there. I'm by no means a wine expert. I'm not even a wine drinker, to be honest with you. But Mark knows his stuff. He definitely knows his stuff when it comes to wine. He's an expert. That would be a very good example of what I said in the beginning, which was my goal for this podcast, is to have conversations with interesting people who know things, and I can learn some things from them, and in the process, the listeners will also learn those things. That was a good example. I definitely learned some things there from Mark. Again, great episode to listen to if you're interested in the wine industry, even some of the intricacies of wine in general. That was a good episode. At the time, I think when that episode was recorded or shortly thereafter, it was one of the more popular episodes that we had to date. And then episode 8, was an entirely different tone. We went more on a bit of a political conversation there. I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Greg Dempsey, and that was a conversation surrounding essentially workplace politics. And Greg was, unfortunately, somebody who lost his job over his workplace politics. He was fired from a government job for sharing his political views. Now, when Greg came on the episode, again, as I mentioned on that episode and since then, it's not that Greg was revealing anything for the first time during that episode. He had already been sharing this information on social media. That's actually where I became aware of it. I didn't know Greg prior to that, and I didn't know him prior to him walking through the door here and us having that meeting. So that was a very interesting conversation. I wish Greg the best. I hope that works out for him. I don't know where that stands currently, but that conversation was maybe 2 weeks before the provincial election that we had here. So there was a lot of political talk swirling around at that time anyway. Episode 9 is to date our most popular episode. It has the most views on YouTube. It is also the episode from which we cut a short video that also received the most views and the most attention online as well, or on social media and on YouTube. So episode 9, for lack of a better term, that was me alone making a rant. I was ranting about woke policies, about government, my dissatisfaction, I guess, for lack of a better term, with the current state of affairs in our government at every level, municipal, provincial, and federal level. I touched on a number of topics there, and I've had a number of people say to me since then that episode resonated with them the most, and the comments were things like, it's nice for somebody to be speaking their mind and saying what needs to be said, and all of those things. And that was essentially the gist of that of that episode. In hindsight, if I could go back in time, I probably would have had Brendan bleep out a few of the, I did a fair bit of cursing in that episode. I was running pretty hot. It was a day or two after Remembrance Day. I was not happy with what had gone on Remembrance Day in this province and in this country. I found there was the level of disrespect for our veterans, and the situation was unacceptable to me. And for better or worse, I can be a relatively passionate guy. So I was running a little hot that week, and I felt it was time for me to, even though it was early on, and I've had people say since then, it was a risky move, sort of making it known where you stand politically and where you stand on these issues that can be a little contentious, perhaps. It was risky to do that early on when at the time we probably still had a few dozen followers maybe. But it, I wanted to say it and I wanted to make it known. And, obviously it's doing something right because it's currently the most popular episode that we have. And certainly everything I said there, I wholeheartedly stand behind. I don't take any of it back by any means. But, it'll be interesting to see moving forward if that continues to be the case. I'd like to have further conversations in those regards with other people as we roll into the new year. Episode 10, I met with Adam Houlihan from Mother Hubbard's Custom Kitchens, and Adam is one of the owners of Mother Hubbard's. I've been working with Adam for some years now, 5 or 6 years at least, and they supply all the kitchen cabinetry, vanities, and so on in the homes that we build. Adam definitely knows his stuff when it comes to kitchens. Again, if you are interested, perhaps considering a new kitchen or a new build, or even just curious in general on how, trends and how that process works, I think that's a great episode to listen to if you're interested in kitchens in general. For episode 11, I met with and had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, Scott Smith. Scott and I are buddies. Scott is also a home builder. As I mentioned in that episode, that's how we met. Actually, my wife and I purchased a home from Scott many years ago before I was a home builder. And we met in the process, and we had a great experience with Scott when we had our house built. And it's helped me sort of solidify that I did have an interest, certainly, in building new homes. And subsequent to that, Scott and I have become good buddies. We're golf buddies. We're just, he is a home builder, as am I, but we have many things in common. And that was a great episode. We talked about some new construction stuff. We certainly got off on a tangent. We talked a lot about politics. We had some political conversation. We had some conversation regarding the current homeless and affordable housing situation here in the province. And, Scott has some good insights on that as well. I think if you're interested in hearing a conversation with two home builders talking about, housing and housing related things, and that's an episode to check out. Episode 12 was, again, with another gentleman who has a wealth of knowledge, Kevin Riles, who is the owner and operator of Sightline Planning and Approvals. Kevin is an expert when it comes to housing development, planning, approvals, and he's been doing this for a few decades now. Kevin handles my approvals and process when it comes to development agreements and larger scale developments when we're putting together a package and putting it forth to the municipality to have it reviewed and approved, hopefully. So Kevin has a lot of insight on the development front. He has worked with a number of home builders and developers, dozens. He's worked on hundreds and hundreds of projects, and that's a very, very interesting episode to listen to if you're interested in housing development and how the planning and approval process works. And he also has some great insights there and stats regarding housing starts and how many homes we need to build versus how many homes we actually build each year. And Kevin's in the know on that stuff. It's a good episode to listen to if you're interested in that. Episode 13, the most recent episode prior to this one, was with the CEO of Atlantic Home Warranty, which is Ian Lazama. Ian Lazama and I had a conversation regarding, obviously, Atlantic Home Warranty and specifically their warranty, the process, the coverage. We talked about a few examples, some things that are covered versus things that are not covered, the process of how it works for homeowners and builders, and the relationship between builders and the home warranty and who does what. That is definitely an episode to listen to for any anyone who is interested in purchasing a new home, whether it's from us or anyone else, that is a recommended episode. I think there's a misunderstanding or no understanding at all when it comes to the home warranty coverage for new homes. And it's a big ticket item. And I would recommend that everybody at least review your home warranty as to, the details and what's included and what's not included. And I think builders could do a better job perhaps of describing that to their customers. But in fairness, customers don't generally ask, and there's a lot going on when you build a home, and warranties tend to be an afterthought that people don't necessarily even, doesn't cross your mind basically until something happens. But that is an episode for any of our customers or would-be customers or potential customers. I would recommend that you check that one out. It's useful. It's useful information to know for sure. That's a summary of the 13 episodes we've done to date. When I started the podcast, originally, my thought process was that I wanted to produce episodes that would be useful and informative to our customers and potential customers on the new home construction front. Information like kitchens and home warranties and mortgages and real estate information and how the process works. That's all obviously aimed at new home construction buyers or potential buyers. And then some of the podcasts and conversations that we had, of course, don't in any way relate to that. And moving forward in the new year, I expect it'll be continue to be a mix of that. I have a few other associates and fellow business owners and people that we deal with that I'm looking to bring on and have conversations with regarding new home construction and small business. And I'm also looking to have conversations in the new year. We'll further some conversations with folks that are involved in politics and other fellow business owners, ideally entertainers, some different folks that are local that can provide some entertaining conversation. One of the things I would like to see in the new year, hopefully we'll see this happen, is it's easy to, when you start a podcast, keeping in mind that what we're trying to do is produce one episode a week, for the time being at least. One new full-length, one long-form podcast, I guess you could call it, each week. And then in there, we'll cut some shorts and do some promotional shorter clips. But in the new year moving forward, of course, 52 weeks in a year, you need 52 new guests. Now, you're going to get some guests that are probably going to come back. There are already at least a couple of people I'd like to have back again in the new year and continue our conversation. And also in the new year, I'll take this opportunity to mention to anybody that's listening, if either you yourself or somebody you know would be is interested in having a conversation and joining me for a conversation, then I'm putting the invitation out there. It's simply reach out to us. You can shoot us an email. I'll connect with you and we can have a conversation as to what it is that you'd like to meet and discuss. I don't even want to necessarily put a limit on what that might be, because there can be some very useful conversations and interesting conversations to be had with things that are outside of my imagination. So if you're listening and that sounds interesting to you and you'd like to have a conversation, then reach out to us and we'll see if we can put something together here in the new year. I'm going to wrap this up here today. I'm going to recap a couple things that I mentioned. I'm going to reiterate again. First of all, let me again thank everybody who has listened or viewed the podcast today. I really appreciate your time, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. I want to be clear with everybody who's listening. And those of you who know me, you know this to be the truth, because you know that most people, when I started a podcast, most people who knew me had the same initial reaction. It was something along the lines of, "You're going to have a podcast?" And I know where they were coming from on that. And yes, I am going to have a podcast, and I'm doing it now, and I'm having a good time doing it. I enjoy this. I enjoy having these conversations with folks, and I appreciate your time in listening. And in return, what I'm hoping to offer, I don't do this because I'm looking for personal celebrityism. I've said that before. That's not in any way what I'm after. What I would like to do is I've created this environment where we can have conversations where people tune in because they're interested in the information and the conversation that's being had. I want to provide you with value. You tune in, you find it valuable to spend time listening. And I think so far we're doing that very well, and we'll get better over time. I'll get better at this, and we'll keep delivering to you, hopefully, what you find interesting. So again, let me say thanks to everybody, and also moving forward here in the new year, if you yourself or somebody you know would like to join me and have a conversation, please reach out. It's builderbyday.com. You can check out the website, and the contact information is there. The other thing I'd also like to mention, I am a home builder, and I know a lot about home building, and I answer questions about home building every day. Every day, this somebody emails or phones his office, and I take those calls and answer the questions, and I'm happy to do so. And I'd like to offer the same thing here. Go to builderbyday.com, or you could even email us at Stonewater Homes, however you want to reach us. If you have questions regarding new home construction here in Nova Scotia, and specifically in the greater Halifax area, then I would encourage you to reach out, send us your questions. And when we can formulate and put together enough questions that I can make an episode out of that, then that's what we'll do. In the new year, we'd like to produce at least one, or however often we can, episodes whereby I can sit like this and run through questions that folks have asked and provide that information to anybody that's interested. So if you have questions regarding new construction, please reach out. If you have information or you yourself would like to share some information or have a conversation, please reach out, and we'll do our best to try to capture that. And again, one last time before we sign off, do me a favor if you can, click the subscribe button, click the like button, make a comment. If you enjoy what you're seeing, it does make a difference for us, and it helps us keep climbing and gaining recognition and gaining exposure, and that's what this game is all about. One other thing I will say is, and not because I'm looking for the recognition personally or bragging rights, but I would love for this podcast to become and be known as the #1 podcast in Atlantic Canada. And what would be great is if it reaches that status, because people say, you can tune in to Builder by Day, and you're going to get truthful conversation. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, but it's going to be truthful, open conversation, and it's worth tuning into. So let's see if we can move toward that goal in 2025. Thanks everybody for listening for this year. We're wrapping up 2024 now. We're looking to 2025 and looking forward to it. I appreciate everybody's time, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the new year.